Does the 560S replace the K702 as my full-time daily driver? Stick around, let's find out. Greetings, comrades, to a Chelsea Home Studio Basics.com, helping you make sound decisions leading to a beautiful audio experience that will make you fall in love with music, not gear, all over again. So, shout out to patron David Rupp for the loaner unit. He was kind enough to send me this headphone all the way from, I believe, California, so big thanks to him. Make sure to like this video if you found it helpful, subscribe, hit the bell so you don't miss an upload, and check the Patreon if you'd like to support the blogging channel in a more personal way. All links for where to buy as well as the official article will be down below as well. I go into much more detail there. 5,000 words worth of detail. Words, Mr. Wordsworth.
Delusions, Mr. Wordsworth. Delusions that you inject into your veins with printer's ink.
So in the box we've got the headphone, a 9.8 foot cable, a 1/4 inch to 3.5 mil adapter, and you got a 2-year limited warranty. So build and comfort, this thing is mostly plastic. This is basically your 500 series headphone through and through. I mean, it feels almost exactly like the others in the line. You know, it's got the all velour padding with the cratered headband pad, similar to the HD560S pad. Actually, that pad was cloth with memory foam on the inside, so a little bit different, but the ear pads themselves are all velour and they mimic the shape of your ear quite nicely. They're decently wide enough to where they're not really going to touch your ears all that much. You might feel it a little bit, but it's not going to bother you. So that's that. Almost perfect clamping force on the sides of your head and does not dig into the top of your head. So probably the most comfortable headphone I've ever worn, the 500 series, along with the Bayer Dynamic 778, 8990 line and the K600, 700 series. Now I'd probably place the AKG's third and the 500 series and Bayer's a tie for first. So it's like a photo finish between which is more comfortable. Not really going to matter that much. The Bayer's pads are circular, whereas these are oval, but other than that, I mean, perfect comfort. These are headphones you can wear for a long time without having to make so much as a single adjustment. So now these are not headphones that I'd feel comfortable like running over, stepping on, etc. Like I could drop them and feel okay, but my friend Luke, who had let me borrow the 598s a few years ago, just told me that his baby stepped on his and they are broken. So I guess the right or left side went out. He's going to try and fix them, but point being that, yeah, you're not going to really, they're pretty fragile, let's be honest. But if you take good care of them, they'll probably be fine. Sounds. Sources include Spotify, YouTube videos, general listening, and film and gaming on PS4. Amps and DACs used include the iFi Zen V2 upgraded version, the iFi Zen original amp DAC, the X-Duo T820 paired with the Dragonfly Red, and the FiO K5 Pro. Now do keep in mind, iFi just came out with a firmware update that allows you to hook up the Zen to your PS4. So I've been having a blast gaming with the Zen plus the 560S. So if you do a lot of console gaming, definitely go for the Zen upgraded version. If not, just go with the regular. But I'll also leave links to the playlist down below, as well as in the official article, which will also be linked down below. So check that out as well. So the more I listened to this headphone, the more I had to start to compare it with my beloved K702, in that both do really well for a lot of the same things. Both are very genre versatile. Both do well for gaming and film. Both have really good Soundstage, albeit a little bit different, which we'll get into in a bit. And so the tuning of the 560S is pretty much immaculately perfect. Like, it's sound signature wise, it's probably, you know, one of the best headphones that I've ever listened to in terms of a fairly neutral response. Now, the main difference between the 560S and other 500 series headphones is definitely going to be in the sub bass. They opted for a subtle bass shelf here. It's nothing like a K371 shelf, but it's also not rolled off and it sounds really good. It thumps pretty well. The mid bass isn't overdone like your mom's meatloaf.
Good. More for me and you.
And it sounds really good. Now, do keep in mind This is still a 500 sounding headphone. It's still mid-fi. It still mostly sounds like mid-fi. But the contrast between this headphone and other headphones in the 500 line, you will notice that tonality is a little bit better here. Resolution is a tad better. All the grain and fuzz that was present in those headphones has now been rectified in this one. So in that sense, it kind of is a mini step up from the original 518, 558, 595, 598, 599, etc. I would consider this like mid-fi on creatine. So it's not freaking roided out meathead status.
Oh yeah!
But it's also not as fuzzy and less refined sounding as those. It's definitely more refined sounding. But, you know, it's a bodybuilder taking a, you know, proven supplement here. I can't believe I just compared a headphone to a fucking bodybuilder. Accuracy, neutrality, it's all there in spades. Do also keep in mind, though, that the treble here, now the treble, very, very interesting to talk about the treble. But first, let's talk about the mids. No, actually, let's just talk about the treble and then touch on the mids. So the mids, actually, let's just touch on the mids and then talk about the treble. So the mid range on most 500 series headphones is roughly the same. On here, no different. You're getting a subtle boost in the presence regions, but it's nothing overdone, like your mom's meatloaf.
The meatloaf!
The treble on its own, when you put this headphone on your dome piece and you start listening, the treble is not going to sound essy, sibilant, or bright, or overly sparkly. It's going to sound really, really good, really, really correct. It's only when you put it up against a darker headphone like the HD600 does that treble, I can't even call it brightness, I can't even call it essy or sibilant or peaky or spiky, or there's lots of word salad words we could use here, but you will notice in comparison with an HD600 that the treble does kind of stand out. But when you're listening on its own, it's pretty much perfect. Now, you probably will notice some slight, gosh, I don't even want to say hiss, because that just sounds bad. It's like, it's not sibilant, it's not essy, it's just, it's like a tad, it has a little smidgen of sparkle. Whereas it's similar to an Ananda, where the Ananda is mostly perfect headphone, but does have that ever so slight bite in the treble. But the 560S sounds mostly perfect on its own, but when you put it up against the 600, you'll notice that the 600's treble is significantly darker and doesn't sound as good to me as 600 doesn't. I actually kind of think the 560S outperforms the 600 in some ways. It's not like a world beater. Like, I still prefer a 6XX or 600 with fresh pads. Do also keep in mind the pads on my 600 are fairly worn, but still you'll notice the difference in treble. The treble on the 560S is definitely better done than a older 500 series model. So they've improved the line with this headphone. But, you know, you're not gonna, no, most people won't really, they'll like the treble. It may bother you a little bit at times, but it's still mostly a perfect sound. It's got this wispy, really nice character to it. It's not over,
Ma, the meatloaf! Fuck!
It's not too in your face. It's not too bright. It's almost just right. But do keep in mind that small little caveat there when you're comparing with darker headphones. So Soundstage here, great width, but not unnatural. You may take off the headphones to make sure that the sound is not coming from the outside. Very typical of a 500 series headphone. Soundstage on them has always been really good. A little bit better than above average. So not like amazing, but you're definitely going to start hearing stuff in all directions, really. The sensations of the Soundstage will vary from song to song. So it could be like a hum, like 25 feet in back of you, which, you know, I kept taking them off to make sure that nothing was going on in my apartment. So there's that, but it definitely varies. So you'll hear differing sensations from track to track. The Soundstage in comparison to something like a K702, so imagine if your hands are here with a 560S, they're like, or like here, imagine with a 702, it's like that. Now, the great part about the 560S is that it fills in these areas better, like up here to your right and left, and sometimes the 702 center image can also go missing, but the 560S is not going to be as wide as the 702. Now, some people may call that unnatural on the 702s. I personally really enjoy it. I love the crisp, snappy nature of the 702s. I love the separation. The 560S's separation to me is not quite as good as the 702s. So this headphone doesn't need much power from an amp, but what I found interesting is that most of the other, actually all of the other 500 series headphones had a 50 ohm impedance with around 106 to 112 decibels sensitivity. This one has 120 ohms, so a little bit harder to drive, but not by much. You're not really going to notice it. I mean, you may be turning the volume up a little bit more, but by and large, this is still super freaking easy to drive at 112 decibels per milliwatt. So yeah, that's that. I use a Zen as well as the other amps that I mentioned, and you're not going to need much power at all. So this is not exactly a 500 headphone because the elevated bass shelf and tonality is a bit better, but still overall mimics the sound signature of a typical headphone in the line. Incredibly accurate, but can also be a little bit dull sounding and a little bit boring. In some ways, the 560S does outperform an HD600 because it sounds neither too bright nor too dark. It feels more neutral because of the less rolled off treble. I do think the 560S, because of this, is tuned a little bit better overall, even though tonality may not be quite as good. So there's this subtle holographic character that the 560S has in comparison to an HD600. Now, also the interesting thing to note about the 58X is that headphone has a holographic sound in comparison to the 560S. But the 560S has a holographic sound in comparison to the HD600. So yeah, the HD600 is sort of like the standard blah 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 for neutrality, but can also sound a little bit dark in comparison to the 560S. The 560S sometimes sounds a little bit too aggressive, but only in comparison to the HD600. So you see how hard this is to like reconcile. The 560S can sound a little bit unnatural when you're listening to a track like Jones' I Loved You First. It's a little bit overwhelming, a little bit too energetic, a little bit in your face versus the 600, right? So like it's only when you're comparing the two headphones. But it's still technically, in my opinion, technically superior, at least as far as that song goes. This could also just point to a volume discrepancy. So like the 560S or the 600 is a little bit harder to drive, so I was turning up the volume, and then when I switched back, maybe I didn't turn the volume back down a little bit, back down enough. I still, though, think the 560S, in comparison, does sound a little bit aggressive. So, but the 560S is a signature that almost impeccably represents what music is supposed to sound like if it was 99.24% unbiased. Again, the treble is a little bit, and I still don't know the solid word for it. Overall, the clarity is there, but resolving power is still not as good as something like an Ananda. Now, this is to be expected at its price, but it's something to point out regardless when considering how hyped up this headphone was initially. It's still a mostly 500 sounding headphone. In other words, it's still mid-fi and still mostly sounds like mid-fi. So, I also go through the definition of clarity versus resolution in the article. There is a clear distinction. No pun intended. Last but not least, we're going to round this out and finish this up. Question: are the 600 and 6XX more resolving than 560S? Yes. Does it matter? Yes, but only because of the fact that for only about $20 more, you can get a more resolving headphone in the HD6XX. In 2016, I paid around $300 to $400. $330 if I remember correctly on the dot for the HD600. Would I pay that now? Not when I can get a 6XX for around $220. Would I pay for the 560S? Not when I already have a K702. Would I pay for the 560S if I didn't already have a K702? I would lean towards yes, as a complement to the HD600 or 6XX. as it stands now, and because I have a K702, I don't really need a 560S for gaming and film, tempting as it may be to get one. That is to say that listening to it doesn't make me want to sell my 702 and get a 560S for full-time gaming duties. It kind of sort of almost does, but not quite. I still like the K702 as my jack of all trades, but your mileage may vary. For me, the reasons come down to the 702's soundstage is wider and separation tends to be a little bit better than 560S. I like that extra width and depth. Some may call it unnatural, and that's completely fine. I personally enjoy the leaner and more neutral bass response, though the 560S is certainly growing on me. This is coming from a former bass head. Both are pretty neutral, 702 albeit a bit less so, but I like the mid-range boost on the 702 and always have. The 560S, while being light years better than a 612, is still a little bit too flat and dull for me despite its impeccable tuning. There's some sort of excitement missing that I can't quite explain. When I make recommendations to people, I've always bypassed the 500 line in favor of 6XX. Why buy one of those when you can just spend $20 more and get a superior sounding headphone? To me, it's an easy decision. The problem is that the HD600 and 6XX aren't very good for gaming. This is why I have both the 600 and the 702. They complement each other perfectly. Keep in mind, if you're reading this, you should either get an HD6XX and a 560S as complements, or an HD6XX and 702 as complements. Get an HD600 if you want to be all original and hip. And I'm not just saying that. I both have a 702 and a 600 as complements and don't plan on selling either because they both do fantastic for different use cases. Though the 702 has become my daily driver for everything. And that's it. Goodbye.